Yeah.
Let's just give her the microphone.
Yeah.
And then, do we have people looking live or how's that working?
Where did Matt go?
Okay, we ready?
Oh, there's.
Okay.
We're good.
All right, I'd like to call the Monona Grove School District Annual Meeting and Budget Hearing to order. Has there been a declaration of public notice? Yes. Thank you. Now for the election of a chairperson. First, I'd like to welcome our school board members, Elizabeth Cook, Susan Fox, Lorraine Gage, Eric Hart, Susan Manning, Peter Sobel, and myself, Andrew McKinney. Also, I'd like to introduce our Superintendent, Dan Olson, our Director of Business Services, Jared Rossing, and Parliamentary, our Attorney, Mike Joker. So, for now, I'd like to call for nominations for election of a chairperson. Peter Sobel.
Aye. Peter Sobel, 6005 Midwood in Monona. Move to nominate Andrew McKinney to serve as chairperson for the 2020 annual meeting and budget hearing.
I second. Judy Rock, 311 Ashland Circle.
All right, first and second. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. Andrew McKinney for the chairperson. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. The announcement of the availability of the minutes from 2019 annual meeting can be found on page 9 in the annual meeting booklet. Next is the superintendent's report. Dan.
Thank you. This evening, I'd like to give a brief presentation about the operating referendum here in the fall of 2020. I'd like to talk tonight about our 5 key areas: critical facts about school funding and budget deficits, information about the expiration of the April 2016 operating referendum, the cost of a proposed $3.7 million operating referendum, and consequences of inaction, and then finally some FAQs and opportunities to engage in virtual conversations. So to begin with, I'd like to talk about why a $3.7 million referendum. And let's talk a little bit about school funding and budget reductions. So to begin with, for the budget that's going to be presented this evening, the 2020-2021 budget, we began with a deficit of about $500,000. And so we've already made those reductions in order to present a balanced budget. And really the challenge is the increasing uncontrollable costs, and our costs going up, inflationary costs with revenues not necessarily keeping up to those costs. And so as we look at what's happened really in the last decade in public school funding, from 2009 all up through the last year, 18-19, statewide this is, inflation rose about 17%. And during that same time period, our state revenue limits grew by only about 6%. And that really is the gap that has caused challenges in having balanced budgets and continuing moving for school districts. So when you look historically about revenue limits and per pupil aid, revenue limits began in Wisconsin back in 1993. And if we go back just to about 2008, 2009, and look at that point, the revenue limits were always something that school districts received per pupil increases, with the idea that it would be generally inflationary increases to be able to keep up. And you see that back at that time, we had per pupil increases of just under $300 per student. And then as budgets began to get tighter, the economy, if you remember, back in that time in 2009, 2010, those limits were actually reduced for 2 years. And then in the 10-11, we actually had major reductions in school funding, and that coincided with the budget repair bill known as Act 10. And at that time, school districts balanced their budgets by making major reductions, primarily in employee benefits, increasing contributions to retirement and as well as insurance and other benefit costs. Since that time, we've received some increases per year that's represented on the graph, and one of the changes that occurred at that time was not just revenue limit increases, but changing that to some per pupil aid with the idea of trying to control property taxes, because revenue limits represent the total amount of revenue that a district can have for a year, and it's made up primarily of not only state aid but also local property taxes. And you'll see that there was a gap year where there was no increase, and then the last few years, again, some increases in aid to really take us back to the levels that we were back in 2008. So, what takes us here today with regard to the reason for this year's referendum? Well, back in 2016, the community did approve a 5-year operating referendum to help fill these budget gaps. And so that allowed us to maintain existing staff, programs and services, but it did not directly address the rising inflation, teacher salaries, or provide long-term funding solution. And that referendum expires at the end of this school year. And so when we look at the importance of this and we recognize what the consequences of our inability to attract and retain highly qualified teachers, specifically based upon salary, that is really another driving factor in the ability to keep up with at least inflationary costs. When we look at specifically at teachers statewide, there's been a decrease of about 29% in teacher graduates since 2011. And then along with that, about an 18% increase in teacher retirements. That really has developed into a teacher shortage in which then the demand has risen and the ability to be competitive in attracting teachers has really been much more of a challenge. Then on top of that, we throw in potential or anticipated loss of state aid, perhaps by as much as $700,000 based upon our early projections due to the impact of COVID-19. And so with that, even though we're in the middle of this pandemic, again, that's a preliminary estimate. And if you look at our budget, again, that will be presented a little bit later this evening, there might appear to be some actual savings, but the reality is that there aren't, or they're not substantial. We still, even though our students are learning virtually, we're still providing meals. We're using our transportation to deliver those meals. And again, the actual, cost, the increased cost because of the COVID really balance out any, potential savings. So then let's take a look at what the tax impact would be of the proposed referendum. So if the proposed referendum were to be approved, the estimate is that the increase in tax rate would be increased by 40 cents per $1,000 of property values, or 40 cents per thousand, or $40 per $100,000 of property value. And the chart shows different intervals of different fair market values of different homes. This tax would be for 4 years and would first be affected on the December 2021 tax bill. Next slide shows the historical graph of the projected mill rate. And again, it goes back to 1993 when revenue limits first were put in place. And you see over time that after a steep decline, then it is leveled out. And you can see what the projected rates would look like towards the end for this year and next year. So for this year, again, we're going to have a projected rate or mill rate of $12.86 per $1,000, and the estimated mill rate for 2021 1/22 would be projected at $13.26, again, on the December 2021 tax bill. Keep in mind that there are several factors that affect this mill rate. This is a very conservative estimate, and factors things like population growth and the effect of COVID on our equalization aid. So what happens if the referendum fails? Well, the first thing that would need to occur is that we'd have to take immediate action to determine the next steps. We certainly would want to have immediate discussions with all of our stakeholders, knowing that the primary effect would be on our teachers and parents, and obviously ultimately our students. And so based upon those budget projections, we're looking at deficits between $3 and $4 million over those next 4 years. So a couple FAQs specifically about the referendum, and as well to talk about some opportunities for future conversations. So first key question, why didn't the April 2016 operating referendum solve our funding problem? Well, this referendum provided only temporary funding for 5 years to maintain staff, programs, and operations. It also reduced a budget gap resulting from years of inflation that had outpaced allowable revenues. It did not address teacher salaries or anticipate the unprecedented consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. Will recent property assessments create an increase in the school portion of my tax bill? Well, the impact of the reassessments will be unique for each property owner. And by reassessments, we're talking about specifically in the village of Cottage Grove. It's going through a reassessment. By definition, a municipality undertakes revaluation to distribute the tax burden fairly and equitably among the taxable properties in accordance with the law. So this essentially brings new developments, upgraded properties, and older assessments in line with fair market value. The most important thing to remember is that in all cases, the school district will not realize any increase in revenue due to the revaluations. So looking ahead, an opportunity to have conversations regarding the referendum. We have a number of dates where we'll have virtual open houses or open doors. In these open doors, we will be informal with not an agenda, no presentation, just an opportunity to ask questions and have discussions. And so these dates will also be shared on the website as well as information about how to connect virtually. And then we'll have another opportunity for a virtual community information night where we will have a presentation and as well a panel discussion with question and answers with some of our administrators as well. Finally, I'd like to talk about the opportunity to vote. We encourage our community to make an informed decision and then make a plan to vote safely. For comprehensive election information, voter registration, and more, you can visit the myvote.wi.gov website that has much more detailed information. Mail-in absentee ballots will be available through October 29th. In-person early voting occurs October 20th through the 30th, though dates and times may vary. Please confirm with your municipality, the city or town or village, before going. And election day again is on Tuesday, November 3rd. If you'd like to contact us for more information, there are plenty of opportunities. First of all, on our district website, we'll have a page dedicated to information regarding the referendum. If you have questions you would like to answer by email, we have a special email set up, mgreferendum@mgschools.net, that we can get a response to you, or if you have questions directly for our school board members. And lastly, if you'd like to speak with someone by phone, you can contact myself or Jared Rosing, our Director of Business Services, at the numbers provided. And thank you, and please vote safely on November 3rd.
Thank you, Dan. Next is the financial report and auditor statement. The treasurer's report can be found on page 11 and 12 of your meeting booklet. A complete auditor's report will be presented to the Board of Education upon completion of the official audit report by Wigner, I hope I pronounced that right, CPA firm, and is expected to be presented in February 2021. Next is budget hearings, and our Director of Business Service, Jared Rossi.
All right, we'll move into the budget hearing portion of the annual meeting, and you can find details regarding the budget starting on page 14 of the annual meeting booklets. The first area that I would like to point out is just talking a little bit about our demographics so you have an understanding. So the district is made up of 6 municipalities, and I've listed those municipalities based on the percentage from largest to smallest with property value in our school district. This percentage is based off of the information from last year due to the fact that our property valuations will not be released until October 1st. But we are anticipating an increase of approximately 3.5%. And you can see what that brings our amount to. What this helps us understand is it will be our driving portion for our mill rates once we have all of our numbers that we'll talk a little bit about during the budget hearing portion. If you want, I'm also a visual learner, so I put a chart together to show you that each year we've saw a little increase in our equalization aid that's ranged from 5% down to 2.5%. So that 3.5% is what we consider a conservative estimate for the purposes of planning our budget and moving forward. If our equalization aid does increase, or equalization value increases, it does not give the district additional funds. What it does do, it has an impact on what our mill rate, which will drive the mill rate lower based on what we have estimated for. Moving on to enrollments, you can see that we've had a steady climb in our district overall enrollments. But you'll also notice that this year we are projecting to see a small decrease. Originally, when the board approved the budget, we were looking at a possible increase, and that was as we were sort of entering into COVID and not for sure exactly what COVID-19 was going to do with the fall start. This number is as of this last Monday. Our official third Friday count is actually this coming Friday, which is another driving point of our final numbers for the budget. So you can see that we are anticipating right now a decrease of about 38. Every day we see a change in that number, actually. We have families that are moving into our district. Last Thursday we had a family of 3 move into our district into Monona, so that number has already changed. And then we have families that are making hard decisions because of COVID-19 and deciding if they are going to continue to go through our virtual ed program, open enrolled homeschool. So those continue. However, Friday is the official count date, and after that we'll give a report to the board at the next board meeting to let them know where we ended up with enrollments. I know this chart is hard to see, but it's also on the website. This is just talking a little bit about where our free and reduced, and as you can see, over the years we've increased to like 21.4% of our population of being free and reduced. Then we saw that decrease, but we're climbing up to almost 20% again. So as the district continues to do its educational programming and moving forward, obviously those are big factors that go into play when we're balancing our budget, especially when I talk a little bit about the process of developing our budget around zero-based budgeting and really building a budget around the needs of our students. So we'll move into the budget overview. One of the things that I like to remind individuals is that our fiscal year starts on July 1st. However, the school district will not be able to officially adopt a final budget until the end of October. That's because of the way that our final numbers come in. There are 3 points that we'll talk about a little bit later, but enrollment, which will be this coming Friday, our property values, which is October 1st, and our equalization aid determination from the state of Wisconsin, October 15th. Once those 3 numbers all come in, the board can actually adopt a final budget, and we can set our tax levy that we will pass along to the municipalities. So this budgeting process actually started back in January of 2000, and let me tell you, this has been definitely a very interesting budget to build. We obviously were moving along, tracking where we thought we needed to be at, and then March came along and we ended up closing in COVID-19. However, as we continued to move forward and did realize some savings in last year's budget, those are one-time dollars that we can save. However, as we move forward and look forward, we might be talking about something that the superintendent had mentioned, like we started the school year virtually. We don't have 100% of our bus routes running. However, we are serving over 7,000 meals to our community, which is all being delivered by school nutrition staff and our bus company. The other part of it is that, we can say that there's some savings on field trips or fall athletics. However, there's parts that we're uncertain of what that's going to look like in the spring. Our goal is to be able to hopefully bring back our students. If we bring back our students and we have a fall season in the spring, there's still going to be transportation costs. There's still going to be referee costs. What is the field trips are going to look like? We're not for sure. But what we do know is that any money that we potentially are saving, those dollars are being reallocated to purchase PPE or to purchase additional material to help our students. One of the things that the board had did this year is we've waived all of our student fees, and our teachers are sending supplies home to our families. So those are budget increases that we will see. However, we're not collecting revenue to cover that. So any of those areas that we potentially are seeing in savings for COVID-19, such as sub-cost or potential some savings in transportation, those are just being reallocated and earmarked to other portions of our budget. We do what we call a zero-based budgeting process. And that zero-based budgeting process means that everybody starts at zero and we work our way up. In past years, we've been doing this zero-based budgeting for approximately 4 or 5 years now. Prior to that, there was the process of everybody received an allocation and you had to build your budget off of that allocation. And typically those areas we see drives up the request for student fees or families having to ask to pay for additional things. So the zero-based budgeting is really focused around each school, looking at what they need based on their student needs, and how we're going to move our students forward based on our mission and vision of this school district. The overall budget also includes our 2018 referendum. If you recall, in 2018, we passed a referendum of $57 million to build a new elementary school, along with some maintenance and updates to our other schools. All that has been incorporated into our tax levy and mill rate, so that's something that has been we are actually entering our second year of construction with our new elementary school. Winnequa has completed their first phase of things, and Glacial Drumlin has completed theirs. So we are, this past school year, we spent about $13 million of the 57. This upcoming fiscal year will pretty much spend the rest of it, and then the next fiscal year will pretty much finish out as school starts and we enjoy all the new facilities and upgraded facilities that we have. We are also seeing an increase in our revenue limit per pupil amount, that 179. Similar to that graph that Superintendent Olson had stated, our revenue limits allows us, which I will talk about, allows us to collect revenue, and that's split between our property taxpayers and the state of Wisconsin through equalization aid. But based on our residents, we get to increase our revenue limit by $179. We are seeing a $0 increase in our per pupil aid increase. We are presenting a balanced budget, and tonight we're proposing a total tax levy of $30,358,342, which pretty much is a small decrease, so we'll call it a 0% increase. So when we talk a little bit about public funding, school funding, there's two major areas where our funding comes from. Equalization aid, which is the state of Wisconsin, and local property taxes, which is our local taxpayers that help us. They are both counterbalancing forces, which means that when we go through the process of setting our revenue limits, if equalization aid decreases in our fiscal year, that pushes more of the burden to our property taxpayers, or vice versa. If we receive additional funds through equalization aid, our property taxpayers see less of it that they have to pick up. And then when we talk about revenue limits, Those were actually established by the legislature back in 1993, and it was pretty much to help control property taxes. And so typically, prior to 1993, our annual meeting and budget hearing, the district would present a budget of what we believe the true needs of all of our students were. The elector would come together, vote on that, and that would be what's setting our budget. However, revenue limits is a very massive worksheet that we must go through. It's 100% following our enrollments. And just to remind you that the enrollment is based on a 3-year rolling average. So if we happen to have 100 new resident students move into our district, we only get to count a third of those. But it's the same way as if we happen to have 100 individuals move out of our school district, we would only count a third and it would work its way down. However, if you start seeing large increases, some of those costs are not 100% covered right away, and we have to work through that process. It really fluctuates based on our enrollment of residents, not open enrolled students, debt, and state aid that we received. And like I said before, this year's revenue limit is going to increase by $175 through the states. And it's similar to the graph that we saw when we were talking about the referendum, which showed you the per pupil increases. This actually shows you Monona Grove's revenue limit per student. So if we had 3,000 resident students and they were all counted as full-time students, which is everybody kindergarten through 12th grade, our 4Kers are counted at 60%. You could actually take that dollar amount or those number of students and multiply it by whatever this amount is to give you a total pot of money that we will subtract out the equalization aid to give the remaining amount that sets our tax levy. As you can see this year with the $175, we are at $11,002 per pupil, which is still by $8 below 2010 and 11. As inflation has increased by 17%, that's pretty much where our expenditures have increased, and you can see our revenues have not maintained with that. So that's just the visual to show you where we're at with our revenue limits per pupil amounts. Moving on to the second portion of the major sources of funding for school district is equalization aid and then per pupil aid. So the equalization aid amount is run through a formula with the Department of Public Instruction. It's really based off of shared costs. There are 3 tiers of that. There's a primary tier, a secondary tier, and a tertiary tier. However, what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to make the playing ground level for all school districts across the state of Wisconsin. So if your property value per student is high, you end up receiving less aid or even potentially losing aid. So in the district like Monona Grove, we actually lose equalization aid. They take it away because in the eyes of the state, the formula shows that our property taxpayers have the ability to pay more than another school district in an area where their property values might not be as high per student. And so, like I said before, equalization aid actually decreases the amount of money that the property taxpayers have to pay. So if we go back to, think about that revenue limit of $11,000, and if we had 1,000 students, the simple math is, obviously there's a lot more things that go into it, but take your 1,000 students times $11,000 to give you your total pot of money. Then when the state comes out on October 15th and says that you're receiving $500,000, you take that $500,000 away from your total pot, and whatever's remaining is the total levy that the board has to accept to cover the revenue side of things. Then we move on to per pupil. Per pupil has been something that is relatively new. It came in 2016 and 17. This is something that's outside of our revenue limits. It does truly give us additional revenue for our students. The one area that we do get concerned about is that it has to be reallocated by the state of Wisconsin through the biennium budget process. For this coming year, there's no increase, so we will take our resident students times that $742 to give us additional revenue to help balance our budget. Compared to the revenue limit, where we have seen a decrease back in 2011-12 of like 5.5%, typically that has always grown, and it wasn't always an easy process to remove through the revenue limit, and so that was why most school districts asked for it to be in there. So Thanks, Matt. So as a school district that's negative aided, for each dollar that we spend less the next year, we actually receive additional funds compared to a school district that is positively aided. So the more dollars that they spend, the more equalization aid they get. So part of the reason that we are seeing an increase projected for this coming year, which we won't really know what that will look like until October 15th, is because we did underspend our budget from last year, and so that will flow through the formula. So we are anticipating a 5% or a $670,000 increase. Moving on to our fund breakdown. So when we get into the fund side of accounting for school finance, there are multiple different funds. And what we'll talk about tonight, just to give you an understanding, is general fund, or Fund 10, is where majority of our education programming happens in the school district. And then the special funds, or Fund 21 and Fund 27, the Department of Public Instruction lumps those together. The one that is really important for a school district to pay attention to is Fund 27, and that's where all of our students or expenditures related to special education runs through. Just note that even though they're two different funds, a lot of times when we're talking about things, we talk about them together because that's our total educational cost. So when we talk about the charts later, you'll see that I combined Fund 10 and 27 to show you how much money, or the percentage that we're spending on benefits and salaries, personal services. And the district also has to, because we did not receive enough aid to cover all the expenditures, in Fund 27, the district has to transfer money out of Fund 10 to cover the difference there. Fund 21 is for all of our gifts and grants that we receive. We have an amazing community that supports our school district and our activities, and any grants or gifts that we receive that's run through the district, we account for them in Fund 21, which can keep them separated and earmarked for those specific things. Moving on to debt service, there are two types of debt service. Fund 38, which is debt that the school board can enter into. It actually comes out of our revenue limits that affects Fund 10, compared to Fund 39, where that's an approved debt by our voters. So example, the $57 million referendum that was approved to build our new elementary school would be classified in Fund 39. However, operational referendums like the 2.6 and the one that we're asking for renewal, or the one that we passed to cover the expenditures of the new elementary schools, those are not considered debt. They are just part of overriding of our revenue limits, and they're just part of our revenue limit calculation and are accounted for in Fund 10. Our capital projects fund, Fund 40, so every school district doesn't have that. So once we go through the process of a referendum, and that's passed, then we borrow the money, and that $57 million then goes into Fund 40, and that's where we spend it out to account for our construction. So you'll see that when we talk about it a little bit later, you'll see that our expenditures overall look like they increase, but we have to keep in mind that we have a $57 million construction project that's happening, and that once that's complete, then obviously our overall expenditures will decrease by $57 million. Fund 50 is our school nutrition or fund, our food service fund, and that's obviously pretty self-explanatory. That's where we account for all of our school nutrition programming through the school district. Our community service fund, Fund 80, is an area that the board has 100% ability to levy outside the revenue limits for the purposes of very specific programming around community service and community activities. And then Fund 99, our packaging and cooperative program funding, is, and for our school district, we run we're the fiscal agent for Dane County School Consortium, and which means that we take care of all their accounting for them, and we account for that in Fund 99, which has no impact on our finances as a school district when it comes to aid calculation, expenditures, etc. So we'll move into general fund, Fund 10, and this is the format that the Department of Public Instruction asked for. What we're going to focus on is our budget 2021. We are presenting an overall budget of $45,231,469. How that's overall run, general instruction is going to count for $22,340,473. Our support services will be at $16,825, and our non-program transactions, and that's pretty much where we transfer money from Fund 10 to our special education programming, is $6,065,285. As you can see on the revenue side of it, our local sources is pretty much made up of all of local property taxes. We're also receiving approximately $3.1 million for open enrollments from other school districts. And then the state is contributing through equalization aid, the per pupil aid, computer aid, just over $18 million. So as you can see, a balanced budget of $45,231,469. Moving on to our special projects fund, which is Fund 21 and Fund 27. That is a $7,542,000. Of that, $7,424,000 is actually for Fund 27, and of that, $4,625,000 is coming from Fund 10 to cover the difference that's not covered by aid through the Department of Public Instruction of the state of Wisconsin. Moving on to our revenues and charts to show you a little bit how we spend or how we receive our money. As you can see, 49% of our revenue is local revenue compared to 41% being state revenue. So if you were to compare across the state, you'll see some of those school districts that have low property values being more funded on the state revenue side and less on the property tax side. But really the makeup between the state revenue and local revenue is really the equalization aid in the tax amount that we receive. And then how do we use our funding? There are multiple ways that we use it. And just a quick rundown is we combine salary and benefits together, which would include on the benefit side, Social Security, Wisconsin Retirement, health and dental, and post-employment benefits. Our purchase services, we work through teachers on call. We do not hire all of our own substitutes like we've done in the past. So substitute costs, transportation, utilities, and other personal contractors if we brought in someone to help us with professional development or attorney fees fall under purchase services. Our non-capital objects are supplies such as consumable supplies, which would be paper, pencils, any apparel, textbooks, and workbooks that we supply to our families. Objects are the equipment, so anything over $5,000 is where we classify that. So obviously they have to be pretty large pieces of equipment. Debt retirement would be lease payments, so the district actually works through a number of leasing companies to lease new technology to keep that refreshed. We are a one-to-one school district. So in order for us to continue to provide the opportunity to refresh the items every 4 to 5 years, depending on their life cycle, we do work with a leasing company to provide that. When we talk about insurance, insurance is not health or dental insurance. That's our business insurance, such as property insurance, liability insurance, workers' comp insurance. Our transfer, right now we only transfer money out of general fund to special education. We are very fortunate that we have a self-supporting school nutrition program, which brings in enough revenue to cover its expenditures on an annual basis. And then other objects would be district dues, fees, or prior year expenditures that come in after the close of our books. And then you can see that 77% of our budget is around salaries and benefits. We are, as a previous board member would always put it, we are a people business. So we hire teachers and staff to help serve our students. And so that's where a majority of our budget goes. And then 16% is around the purchase services side of it, with the remaining 7% falling with debt, equipment, and supplies. So when we talk about having to potentially reduce our budgets, obviously you see the larger areas typically what covers those reductions, and that would fall under the employee salary and benefit side of things. Moving on to debt service. So as I said before, we have two funds that make up our debt service, Fund 38 and Fund 39. You'll see that we are anticipating a payment of $6,872,538. However, revenues that are coming in is just over $7 million. And this is just one of those quirky things that we go through with school finances because our budget runs on a July 1 to June 30th, but your taxes run on a January to December. So when we levy, we're levying based on debt service that's going to be paid during January to December. So each year there's always a little bit of carryover, and at the end of your debt service project, the last year of your payment, then you will under levy, and that will take the fund balance and pay what your last payment's going to look like. Moving on, and this will just show you as a visual slide of things where Fund 38, our debt service, and so there's a couple of things in here is where the board has borrowed money to help finance the 40 acres that we purchased. We've rolled out a new post-retirement benefit a number of years ago, and part of that was the concept of making sure that we were able to pre-fund that, and those are expenditures that happen in Fund 38, and you can see that our last payment for that will be in 2035 for that, but it just keeps stepping down. And then when we do go to Fund 39, when we go and borrow or we refinance, we look at our existing debt schedule and we try to overlay so we're not seeing large peaks and valleys to try to help mitigate any large increases. I mean, we all like to see large decreases in our taxes, but it's great if you have 1 year where it drops tremendously, but then the next year it jumps. Let's try to keep it flat. And as you can see, when we combine both of our debt services together, we try to keep it pretty level, other than, and then it slowly just drops down. And then our last payment will be May of 2039, which is our new school that's being built, or the $57 million referendum, which would be. So this year we have a tax levy expenditure of $6.8 million, or expenditure side of it that will be coming out for debt service. Moving on to the capital project fund, and this is just as a reminder, this is where we are taking money to build our new elementary school and do our construction projects. So as you can see that actually we received the money at the very end of our 2018-19 school year. Then it carries over as a fund balance, and this past year we just spent under $14 million, and so next year we do anticipate having expenditures through the end of June and $31 million, and then our final payments coming in those last, early part of the 21-22 fiscal year. So right now, obviously this number could possibly change depending on the schedule, but based on the ideas that we've been shared with Findorf and EUA, we do believe this is a pretty solid number. Moving on to Fund 50, and this is where we talk about our school nutrition program. And last year we saw a decrease in the revenue, and part of that was because of what happened in March and we closed school. We did provide meals to families. However, the amount of meals that we had individuals participating in was fairly low. We had approximately 250 meals per week in Cottage Grove. What we're excited to announce this year is this upcoming week, we are actually preparing and delivering 7,913 meals. So it's definitely a huge change, and it's a great opportunity. It's free to all of our families, all of our community members that are 18 and under for this program. And like I said before, it's also ensuring that our school nutrition staff have employment, along with keeping our contract whole with Nelson's bus service, because when we do come back, as most of you probably know, it's not the easiest job to find bus drivers or even individuals that work in school nutrition. So being able to keep them on staff and actively engaged is definitely a positive opportunity. So we don't necessarily see large savings due to the fact that we're not transporting students every single morning. What we're doing is we're transporting over 7,000 meals on Tuesdays and Thursdays, hand delivering them to the doors of residents or wherever their students are attending and they need that. Community service, our Fund 80, and this is where you'll see we have a $700,000, and most of this expenditures that fall in this is we run our pool out of the high school, along with our SRO officer program and our communication side of things. And then we also do offer summer camps for our community through the athletic program, which a number of years ago we brought that under Fund 80 and offer it as an opportunity for everybody to participate, so families don't feel like they have to belong to a club sport or something like that. It's really just to help our community in the concept of putting that connection between our high school and offering a community rec program. So we are anticipating revenues and expenditures at $700,000. And then when we, and I apologize for the wrong title on that. I missed that when I was adding slides. But so what this is showing us is the total expenditures. So if you look at it, it shows that we have an 18% increase in total expenditures, and that's because we have what I talked about, that Fund 40 in our construction side of things. And realistically, if you took out that $31 million that we're spending and the $13 million, we're really seeing a very small increase in our overall expenditures. So there is a note here that the reason that this is an increase, or the increase last year of the 28.82, is due to the building referendum and us expending that. So when you look at our proposed tax levy, you'll see that we're proposing for general fund $22,614,141 that would classify under the general fund. Our debt service levy would be $5,650,000. Our non-referendum levy is at $1,494,201, and we are looking at a $600,000 community service fund to bring our total school levy of $30,358,342, or like I said, it's pretty much 0% at this point. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see where this brings our mill rate, and actually something that we continue to see change as new numbers come in. So back when the board approved our preliminary budget and we were anticipating numbers, we were anticipating a mill rate of that $12.84. Then since then, our July 1st aid estimate comes in, which brings us down to $12.64. So this number is going to fluctuate based on three things that are still outstanding. And that's on the next slide. So you'll see that our final membership count will be on September 18th, which is this Friday. Our equalization property aid will be on October 1st. And then on October 15th will be our amount that we'll receive. So then we'll know all of our dollar amounts, and we can give a clear picture of what that potential mill rate would look like. And the board would approve that at their last, at the end of October, setting that by November 1st. And then that will actually conclude the budget hearing portion. Are there any questions? Judy.
What is our reimbursement rate for our special education fund in the state?
So that's a great question. So we are supposed to see it go up to approximately 30% or $30 or 30 cents on the dollar that we spend. However, and that was roughly around 28 cents. So that was part of the biennium budget that was passed, so the second year of that. But obviously that will depend on how much expenditures happen in special ed throughout, but we're all anticipating that it should be around that 30%. And then as we talk a little bit more about special education, so we would have to spend that money this past fiscal year, and then we'll receive the aid this fiscal year. So if we spent $1 million last fiscal year on special education, then that 30% will apply on that, and then we'll get that aid for us this year. And so it's always based on what you expend when you expend the money. All right.
Thank you, Jared. Next up is our business items. The first is adoption of tax levy. And I'd like to have a motion, just follow the script on the board here. And since we
Fair deal here. I, Judy Runk of 311 Asher Circle, move to approve the 2021 tax levy in the amount of $30,358,342. $30 million. Oh, I'm trying to be real nice.
I have a second.
Peter Sobel, 6005 Midwood in Monona, second.
Any discussions? All right, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Next up is the authorization of salaries for school board members. Duly noted that our salaries were $3,100 per member from 2019-2020.
I, Matthew Bidorf, 101 Femright Drive, Monona, Wisconsin, move to set the 2021 annual salaries of the school board members at $3,100 per member.
I second. Judy
All
Runk
right.
from 311 Asher Circle.
Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next, the reimbursement of school board member-related expenditures.
I, Judy Runk of 311 Asher Circle, move to authorize the reimbursement of school board members for expenses incurred on the performance of duties.
Yep, sorry.
Matthew Bidorf, 101 Femright Drive, Monona, Wisconsin.
All right, any discussion?
I'd like to comment for those who might not be aware. The school board member expenses primarily that has to do with the expenses that the board incurs when we go to the Association of School Board meetings. It's held every year in January in Milwaukee. And it's almost entirely the cost associated with our attendance at that meeting.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Hearing no more discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next is authorize the school board to establish the date, time, and place of the 2021 annual meeting.
What do we suggest?
No, you just authorize us to send it.
Oh, okay.
All right, so just gives us the option of sending it.
Okay. I, Judy Runk of 311 Asher, move to authorize the school board to establish the date, time, and place for the 2021 annual meeting and budget hearing.
I'll second that. Matthew Bidorf, 101 Femright Drive, Monona, Wisconsin.
Any discussion? Yes, Peter.
I would just comment that the state law provides a statutory date for the annual meeting. It's, what is it, sometime in July, I think? But it's an inconvenient time because we don't have enough financial data to accurately put together the information we need for this meeting. And so this motion lets the school board set the time set the date and time of that meeting at a more convenient time, like tonight, so that we can do the job accurately.
Thank you, Peter. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next up is other business. No other business? All right. Next up is adjournment.
I, Peter Sobel of 6005 Midwood in Monona, move the meeting be adjourned.
Judy Runk seconded.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating in our 2020 annual meeting and budget hearing. Please be safe out there. Thank you. Oh.